Hey, it's Margie with the Asking Spot, and I'm doing something slightly different than I normally try to do. Normally, I'm trying to give you hey, this is some product I tried. This is how I did it, and if it's successful, great, you can learn from that, or if I fail, you can learn from that too.
That's more like it.
This time around, though, it's kind of a part two. I really got into embroidery,
Obsessed.
so I'm going to do one of these, and one of these, it'll be in the description below. You can see the first video I did on my mini masters, and this is going to be part two. And if you're just like, hey, but I really like the how-tos, not to worry. I also did a little bit of that. I am doing a how-to with regards to these guys. They sure make a lot of fun noise, but they're basically frame hooks, and they will be in the bonus part of this video. You can see which one I liked better and why. But let's get to the art. Now, the first one I'm going to show you is from an Alma Thomas. This is my version. This is hers. Well, here, I'll just put them both up. That'll make it easier. The coolest thing about this, the reason I really love this piece is because I realized that this artist, she was born in like the late 1800s, when horse-drawn carriages were still normal means of transportation. She got so inspired by the whole, trip to the moon that she started getting into space. And this piece is called Eclipse. Makes a lot of sense. It's really cool. I think that her artwork stands for itself. It's beautiful. But then on top of it, you also realize that she did a lot of first. She was the first to graduate from a historically black school in their new art department. She's also the first black female artist to have something that's permanently in the White House. Of course, it was posthumously, but regardless, she did have some of her art displayed in the White House while she was still alive. It's just, I don't know, her work is really, really cool. And the fact that she inspired teachers and stuff to do, little mosaics with kids, that was pretty cool too. But yeah, it made me think bright and happy. So then we move on to, I think I'm going to try and do these sort of alphabetical. This is Amedeo. It's going to be by their first name though. Modigliani is who you more famously know him as, and he's the guy who does the long neck pieces. Now, what got me started on this guy's work was originally I just saw the girl in the sailor blouse, I believe. It was one he did of a servant. And I did it, and I didn't do so hot with it. I mean, here's my version of it. My eyes, I didn't get that. He is really good at doing this disinterested stare, and I just couldn't duplicate it. But I still really liked his work, and I thought, well, I'll try another one. And then that's when I came across this one, which is Jean, and this was his muse. And well, all right, here's my version. I'm just going to keep on doing the two side-by-side stuff. Jean is his muse, but it's kind of really sad, the sort of love story they had. He was quite a bit older than her, but not like decrepitly older than her, because, I mean, he died only at like 36, 37. But he met her when he was, just starting out in the painting world as far as doing models and stuff like that. He had been doing a lot of servants. Here she is, this rather well-to-do lady, and he met her when she was 19. She came to take classes, and by the time she was 22, I think. Sadly, he died from any of the number of illnesses he had throughout his whole life. But after he died, she killed herself. But here's even more tragically, she was expectant. She was like 8 or 9 months pregnant with his child, and she did it. And it was just 2 days after he died. It's really very tragic, and it just, it's one more reason though that now we're discussing it, that we can remind people about the suicide line you can call if you or someone you know is thinking anything along those lines of hurting themselves or someone else. Please call. Moving on, I'm probably going to pronounce a lot of these artists wrong, so
Most definitely.
apologies in advance. It's Bertha Morissette, but this is the version of her piece that I did. Again, I'm just gonna do the side-by-sides. She was pretty cool. Recognized as a talented artist from a very young age. Her parents sent her off to, you know, more professional art education. And the cool thing is that by the age of 19, she was already registered with the Louvre to be a copy artist, which is kind of cool when you think about it. Back in the day, that's how they studied. They would study the masters, they would reproduce them, and then those pieces get sold. That's why you can get a lot of forgeries. But the weird thing is sometimes those forgeries were done by even more famous artists, so they can be valuable too. Anyway, so I just thought she was really cool. The thing I like though is this is another illustration of why I like doing these copy works, because whether you do it in embroidery or whatever medium you want to do it in, is when you're copying, you have to study every little detail. And when you first glance at this picture, sure, you're going to see, you know, two people there, but it's the books under her hands, and the books around her, and then the picnic basket off to the distance. And I'm just like, oh, this is magical. I don't know if I'd noticed that had I not stopped to cover every little single bit of the piece. And so anyway, that was that one. Moving on to Camille Pissarro. Now, Camille Pissarro is one of the artists that I did 2 pieces of. There's actually only like 3 in total that I did 2 of. But in his case, it was because the first one was a highly detailed piece. And, well, I'll do one of these and one of these. It was just really kind of hard to actually get all those details, I felt like, in a way that did him justice. He is a wonderful artist with pathways. When you look at his work, no matter if it's his early stuff or his later stuff like this is, you kind of feel like you're watching a path, and it just draws you in, and you just want to go wherever the path is going. And when I was doing this piece, there's that little tiny window. You can barely see it in mine, but you can definitely see it in the original. That little window or door that goes through the farmyard, that goes out into the great wide world. I just, the whole time I was like, oh, I want to go that way. I want to follow through it. Well, then after I finished the whole thing, I was like, I need to give this guy another shot. I feel like I could do even better. And I also wanted to do a winter scene. Well, sure enough, there was this beautiful winter scene. And as I was doing it, I started looking more and more at the details, and I started going, oh, this little woman, I really want her to get into the warm house. And I realized, wait a minute, this little woman looks a lot like the other woman from the other, and sure enough, I think I finally got to go through my window. I think this is the other side, granted in winter instead of spring, but still, it's the other side of the farmyard, and it made me very happy that this coincidence sort of happened.
Easily amused.
Moving on. Third artist I did 2 of their pieces of. It's first one, it's Edvard Munch, and this is what I did. I'm just giving you sort of the perspective of how small it is, but here it is. And the piece is called Melancholy, and this drew me right to it. I thought this piece was so cool because it was done so long ago, and yet it's timeless. You could see this in an art museum right now and think, oh yeah, that artist gets melancholy. Great with mine, it looks a little bit like a sad Simpson character.
Indeed.
But still, I really, really loved it. And then everybody who found out who it was, Edvard Munch, isn't he the guy who did the Scream? You got to do the Scream. Well, for the longest time, I was putting off doing the most famous works by artists because I felt like
people point out your flaws.
that way you could definitely tell my mistakes. But then I thought, what the heck, I'll go for it. So many people wanted it. So here is my version of the Scream. And there you go. I just think it's kind of interesting, though, that the Scream, Edvard Munch was very influenced by the works of Van Gogh. And when you start thinking about it in that way, you realize, oh, okay, yeah, I do see Van Gogh got into, really adding color as a way of expressing different emotions. And I think Edvard Munch did the same as well. And of course, both of them were battling a bit of depression. So that kind of came through too, except for this is, it's the expressionism. It's going really much deeper into the idea of I'm expressing how I feel about various situations when you look at the Scream. Whereas Melancholy is kind of straight to it and just done in vibrant, happy colors. That's kind of the camouflage that's on the outside. So either way, I loved it. So there you go, Edvard Munch. Moving on to an American artist, we have this piece I did. It is titled Nighthawks, and it is by Edward Hopper, and this is more into realism at the time though, but as he titled it, he called it introspective realism. And a lot of people, when they looked at it back in the day, because this was around the startup of World War II as far as America entering into it, and they showed that they felt like the distance between the waiter and the patrons at this place were showing and illustrating, oh, that was how Americans were kind of distanced from what was going on in the rest of the world. So I kind of thought that was a really cool interpretation of his work. The thing that I love though about when you copy somebody else's work like this and you start delving into it is you start studying every little detail. And one thing I caught that I never would have caught before is if you look at the second window from the left, on the second, that's a cat. And I managed to get the cat in my work too. So so that was just fun and another cool piece to do. Next one is very sentimental to me for a number of reasons. It's a painter who loved his dog, Tiffany, very, very much, and I'm a dog lover. He was also born and raised in Louisiana, where I wasn't born there or raised there, but I did move there, meet my husband, and we had 2 kids there. So I wanted to make sure I did an artist from Louisiana, and it's George Rodrigue. George Rodrigue is most famous for doing a lot of beautiful work about Louisiana that he didn't even know was so beautiful while he was living there. It wasn't until he moved to do art study in California that he got homesick and realized how much he loved his state. So he moved back and he did all these paintings and he would do portraits of people, but he also did his dog Tiffany, who was this cute little black and white dog. But sadly, Tiffany died, and after she passed that little rainbow bridge, he decided to do one other piece about her. And he painted her. You'll see, like, this is the beautiful New Orleans architecture and the tree, the silhouette, everything he really loves. And of course, his night watchman there. It was not called the Blue Dog, this first piece. He painted Tiffany blue because it made her look ghost-like. It got so well received that he continued painting the Blue Dog in various different ways, including one year when I voted. It was really cool. We had a sticker and it had the American flag in the background, but it had the Blue Dog from George Rodrigue in front and center. So it just shows you how different turns in our lives really affect what we become and how we move on in life.
Awesome.
I guess I'm getting too preachy. Let's get another piece out. Gustav Klimt. Klimt. There we go. I have the hardest time with this man's name. This was a piece I did because one of my sisters is a big fan of his work. And the problem I had though is when it comes to when they're really blended skin tone pieces, it's very hard to do with embroidery because, the red doesn't blend. But he did do a lot of like greenery scenes and floral scenes. Now, he was heavily influenced by his muse. It was this woman, and she was a clothing designer. And so sometimes he would paint her in the clothes she designed and everything like that. But he always seemed to go into that little drapey form that he does, that kind of mountain shape. And I kind of got the feeling that he might have been making fun of artists at the time, because even in this one, he's got that mountain shape. And remember how artists, they used to always see him back in the day and they'd put their thumb up and so I just noticed that these things kind of look like it's his thumb blocking it, and then when his thumb goes away, it's magnified. Of course, I might be reading a lot into it because I saw pictures of him, and he actually used to like to wear gowns and be shaped like that. So I don't know. There's not a lot we do know about him, because in interviews he would say, I don't need to tell you about me. Anything you need to know about me, you can read it in my pictures. Here's the thing. He didn't do a lot of kid pictures, and yet he fathered 14 kids. And I would think kids should have picked up more in his pictures. You know what I'm saying?
We know.
My apologies in advance. This one, I know I'm not going to get his name right. I'm going to do one of these, and I'll refer to the gentleman as Tarke, his last name, because I kind of think I get it there. But I have loved his work for such a long time. I actually have one of his pieces behind me in a print. He was Hungarian and Yugoslavian born, and unfortunately, his family, it was during World War II, and when he was 9 years old, they took him off to a concentration camp. Fortunately, it was only a year there, which, a year, wow. They were rescued by the Allied Liberation Forces. So he and his family they ended up moving and immigrating to Israel. And he became an artist that celebrated the kinder, the nicer parts of life. And generally, they were genteel ladies enjoying tea, and he did them in so many varieties of ways. Now, because I have a daytime one, I thought, okay, I want to do one that's kind of darker and moodier, so I went ahead and did this one. It's called The Teapot. Here, I'll do these. And I love his pieces. I love the pick of colors. I love the style. I love that you can almost hear the women and what they're talking about, or you can be a part of that conversation. So really, really appreciate it. I thought it was interesting though, as hard as life was, he died doing exactly what he wanted to do. He was in Detroit and he was a guest of a gallery, and his work was on display when he passed away.
This is sad.
Next artist he is from Spain. It's Juan Miro, and I really, really loved his work. Now, mainly though, I was looking for a little delve into abstract and cubism, and that's sort of where he came in. He's sort of one of the people that helped lead the way with also the surrealism movement. But what I love though is he was known for having a sense of humor about his work. While other artists were like, oh, it's so serious, you just don't get it. He was like, no, this is meant to be fun. And he actually, that's why I picked this particular piece though. It's just dog howling at the moon. And I love it. It's simple, it's controlled, and it makes me happy every time I see it. And admittedly, anybody else looking at this will be like, that's not that hard with embroidery. Anybody can do that. Right. That's why I'm sharing all this. I'm hoping I inspire you to do it, because the calm I get from doing these pieces. And then there's also the creativity that happens when I start looking at other artists' work, and because I go through a lot of their stuff just so I can see, what would work well for how I'm doing. I digress, but it really, if this inspires you to start doing this, I hope so, because it's been wonders for me.
Good for you.
This one is kind of a sad one. It's not so much the piece. The piece is lovely. I really liked. It's Marie Backemond.
That doesn't sound right.
Yeah, I probably got her name pronounced incorrectly, so we'll be referring to her as her first name for the rest of this. Marie, though, she was a fabulous artist, and she was involved in the Impressionist movement, but even according to her son, he was like his father, who was also an artist, did not like the Impressionists. He was more of a realist, and he didn't approve of her work. He did not support her. He talked her down on stuff and wouldn't show her work as much to anybody else. And you can see that does have an effect, because later in life, she really just sticks with paintings that are just in her garden. And a big feature of many of her paintings though are her sister. And both my sisters are so supportive, so I was drawn to her for that reason. But then you read more about it, it was just really, really sad. But interestingly, though, there's some part of it that, how when you have only one person's perspective,
like yours.
I wonder if Gauguin, who was the same guy who caused Van Gogh to chop off his ear, if he wasn't also something to do with this. Because you see, Marie's husband actually introduced her to the Impressionists. Namely, though, she got him around Gauguin. And then he changed his tune about it. Now, I don't know, maybe he just changed his tune because she got really, really good at it, but jealousy was in there one way or another. And it just, I don't know, it feels some thought there. As far as this piece, though, it's because she was holding an umbrella. One of my sisters is a big fan of art with umbrellas in it, and I thought, oh, I have to do this. So there you go.
It's an umbrella.
Now, of the female artists I have copied, this is probably the most famous. It's Mary Cassatt. I'll do one of these and one of these. This one Mary Cassatt, though, her life was like crazy wild. She was a really talented artist, and her father didn't approve of it, but he was like, hey, we're about to have the American Civil War. So he sent Mary and her sisters and their mom off to Europe. And so she studied there, and it just reaffirmed her art love. But then they had the Russia Franken, I'm getting that wrong, but yeah, the Franco-Prussian, that war started to happen, so she came back. But then she was back in Pittsburgh with her family, and she got really annoyed with her dad once again. So she's like, fine, I'm off on my own. So she goes off to Chicago, and we have a lot less work from Mary because, well, the Chicago fire happened. And yeah, it burnt down her stuff. So it's just crazy. This woman just kept moving back and forth. Well, finally, she did move back to France, and she got back with her Impressionist friends, and she, continued to painting, but she also bought a French chateau, and she kind of got sort of obsessed with fixing it up, and it turned out great in the end. But it's just interesting how many different life events coincided with big changes in her life and her art, and yet her pieces are really very sweet and very tender moments in life that they weren't caught up in everything else that was going around with her. This one, though, is especially poignant for me. I had just sent my younger of my two kids off to Chicago. Both of my kids are at University Northwestern. I was feeling very sad about it. Weirdly, at the same time, my sister was going through a box of my mom's things and came across this address book, and it was just, American artist, and she thought I should have it. That no one addresses were in it. The book was never used. But when you open it up to P, which was my mom's name, there it was. They celebrated artist for the place card for P was Mary Cassatt, and it was these two kids on the beach. And for a mom who sent her kids from the sunny, sandy, wonderful beaches here in Florida to the very cold Chicago, it meant a lot to me. So there you go.
Pull yourself together.
Ooh, this next artist is pretty cool. He is actually from Switzerland. That's where he was born, but he was this really talented artist, and his family clearly supported him, and he was doing great with that. But then World War I broke out, and he decided after two of his artist friends died, he was going to go and fight for the Germans. Now his father is still in Switzerland, is like, wait a minute, we're not German, what are you doing? So he pulled some strings, and rather than actually being out in the front lines, instead he was a clerk whose job was also to paint camouflage on the military equipment and stuff. So when he had some off time, he painted this piece, and it's great architecture is, I think, what he titled it. It was interesting, though, when the art aficionados look at it, they're like, oh yes, he did all these lines in straight and stuff like that. And then you show the depth of his sadness clearly from World War II because of, look, he did the sun, that's the only round thing in there. He did that in such a deep, dark color. I'm calling bogus on that one because this is my reasoning. I went ahead and I looked it up. In Germany, in 1917, there was a solar eclipse. I think that's all this was. I think he'd seen a solar eclipse and he put that on top of there, because doesn't that kind of make sense? Well, it did in my eyes. At any rate, I just loved I love the story behind it, but in addition to that, I love the lines, the geometric lines and stuff that he does. Paul Klee does a lot of really cool stuff like that. So if you're into more of an architecture style, you might want to check him out. Last but certainly not least, it is Kandinsky. This is an artist, and I'll do this. This is the one I did, and this is his original. An artist with an interesting backstory. Like, for starters, he didn't actually start painting until he was 30, even though he was encouraged by his father to pursue art, if not in painting, in music. So he did do violin and piano and whatnot. It was because he had a profound sensitivity to certain sounds and words and colors. As it turns out, they believe that he had synesthesia. I'll do one of these.
Say what?
He had synesthesia, and so do certain members of my family. I have a little of it. So I was definitely an understanding, and it drew me to it. This piece, though, this particular piece, is nothing like the rest of his works. Oh yes, he was definitely into abstract, but they weren't as uniform as this. They were much more brought out. Why? Because this was actually a test piece. This was a piece that he was looking at, because, synesthesia, you can hear colors sometimes, or, numbers have a color when things just kind of operate differently. he was testing the harmony that happens between the colors and the circular shapes and the squares. And that's all this was about. It turned out to be probably his most famous piece, even though it was just a
Finally
test.
over.
I love that backstory. If you could give a thumbs up, subscribe, that would really help out the channel. Just because I feel bad not giving you anything that actually is kind of helpful. Coming up in the bonus part, I've got the different hooks and why I liked one versus the other. So now that you've seen all of the frames, you understand why I've become very familiar with Sawtooth Hangers. That's these little hooky things that go in the back of frames. I am getting ready for a gallery showing at Creative Liberties, and I have my sisters to thank for that. And I'm really excited about it, but I had to get all of these frames ready for it. None of them had, well, very few of them had the little hooks in the back. So went out to get these sawtooth hooks, and I tried this one, and I tried this one. Now, this one is pretty ideal, you would think, if you've just, you're not likely to have, like I have 26 pieces here. You're not likely to have that many. So you would definitely want to get this, right? If you're just doing one. Here's my problem. I only really had to get this for one of my pieces because the frame was super thin and this doesn't go very far into it, so they were the better version to use. I caution though, they are kind of temperamental. I mean, there was 3 hooks in there and only 2 of them worked on my frames. One of them I completely damaged. So I'm not a big fan, even when I started to pre-drill. But then if you're gonna pre-drill, why not go with the other one, especially when you look at your cost point? I spent like, I think $6 or $8, I don't know, something like that. It was not very expensive, but I got 25 hooks and that went a lot farther. And I had much more precision with it. Now granted, I got a little tiny drill bit and I made sure I put a little flag on it so it didn't go too deep in my frame because I learned the hard way, and I hammered one well through and I demolished my beautiful frame. Yeah, living and learn. So hopefully this will save you some time. I put the little flag on it though, and I started not drilling too far and hammering too far, and it worked out great. It got into just like a regular, machine setup. I kind of figured out the drill and I knew how to do it, and it worked much faster. So when you think about it that way, and especially because they don't go bad, I mean, I didn't use all of them, I can go ahead and hold on to these till the next piece of art comes into my life that I need to put a saw hook on it. It was much easier to get perfectly precision lineup and things going the way they should be, and it ended up having no damage to any of them, and everything looks neat and works well. So if I had to do it all over again, I never would have gotten the hammer-in ones that are just by themselves, although I suppose I'd have to because I had that one tiny thin frame. If that's not the case though, definitely go ahead and get the other ones. Oh, and my other tip though, if you're going to do something that weighs more than, say, 2 pounds, you might just want to go to a professional frame shop because they have a whole series of different hooks that they can use. These sawtooths probably might not be best on anything that weighs any weight because of how they are put into pieces. Thanks for watching the Asking Spot.